Hoosier Surveyor podcast, brought to you by the Indiana Society of Professional Land Surveyors. Welcome back to the Hoosier Surveyor podcast. This is Ryan Selby, and we're continuing on with part 2 of our conversation with Gary Kent and Ryan Swingley. So if you didn't catch part 1, you need to go back and listen to the last episode. And if you have, carry on with the conversation here in part 2.
So, all right. 2 weeks notice, no job, pregnant wife. First child?
Second.
Second. So how many kids do you have?
No, it was first.
Okay.
It was first. I have two. I have a son who's 42, a daughter who's 38. They are both in Southern California.
Okay. So that's why you make some pilgrimages out there very often?
Yep. They live in the San Diego area. They've been out there over 20 years now. I've flown into San Diego, I would estimate 75 times in the last 20 years. I'm flying out on Christmas Day to see them.
Yeah. Awesome. So you start looking for a job. Find your way to, was there anywhere between Marion County and Schneider?
Yeah, actually, I wasn't too concerned about it because the economy was good at that point.
This was what year?
This was 83.
Okay.
It'd come out of the recession. Things were looking pretty good. I had made a lot of contacts because back then, you didn't go online and pull your section corner ties. You actually had to walk in the office, and that's where I met Lee Miller, and I met Jake Hall, and I met Charlie Campbell, and I met all these people coming in the office. So I knew a lot of people. So I wasn't really concerned about it. I thought, I got enough contacts. The economy's good. I think I'll be able to land something. And what happened was I sent a note out, said, hey, I'm leaving the county, and I'm going to be looking for something. And Jake Hall called me. Jake was one of the owners of United Consulting. Not USI, it was United Consulting. And he said, and this is how the way Jake was. Jake was just a great guy. And I assume he's still around. I think he's probably in Florida. But he said, hey, you may not want to come to work for us forever, but I know you're looking for a job. He goes, come work for us while you're looking. You can still look around, and at least you'll be getting a paycheck in the meantime. So I did. I was there for probably a month or so, and I ended up talking to a number of different people, but eventually John Schneider called me, and I went in and interviewed with him and Brad DeReamer. And Brad was a partner with John at the time. Brad ended up leaving Schneider in the early 90s, I think, and he was mayor of Greenfield. He's on Fisher's City Council now. Good guy, and they interviewed me and made me an offer, and so I took it. And
right there on the spot, or they sent you an offer letter?
No, I think they probably sent me a letter or called me.
Just to set the age difference again, my first job out of college was United Consulting, and I think my second week there, I helped move Jake Hall's stuff out of his office or cubicle because he was officially retiring.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, and 83 was the year I was born.
Okay.
So,
well, we need to back up on
that
some.
too.
We need to back up and fill in some footnotes here. For those that are younger, an ARBS map was essentially the GIS of the day, right?
Yeah, an ARB map was called an arbitrary map. And Union Title originally created them, and then lawyers had them. They kept them maintained. What are ARB maps? They didn't have them for the downtown area, but they had them for the areas outside downtown Indianapolis, covered the whole county. A normal ARB, we called them ARB map, was an arbitrary map. I have no idea why it was called that because they weren't arbitrary at all. But it was a map of a section, and it showed every parcel in that section. If there was a subdivision, it just showed the subdivision, but every parcel. So if there was a 5-acre parcel, it showed it on there, and it had, it was very similar to what we would do when we're preparing for the field back when, right? We would draw it out. We'd have, maybe the dimensions, probably wouldn't put angles on there, but some dimensions, and they would have deed record and page. So for any parcel outside downtown Indianapolis, you could go to the ARB and pull off a deed record for that parcel. They were spectacularly helpful, and lawyers' title kept, and they were on Mylar, and somebody's job was to every transfer, somebody was changing the deed book and page on that, or the instrument number. Marion County ended up, I don't know how I found out. Probably Joe told me, and I would go over to lawyers. I got some good friends. I had a really good friend over there, and I'd just go over and say, hey, can you give me a copy of this ARB? And Marion County ended up with a boatload of them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whatever happened to them, but they were absolutely, and to this day, would be invaluable.
We have a set of old ones here that are bound in some blue books. And yeah, there's sometimes where you get some of those old deeds and you're looking and you're like, is that a 5 or a 6
yeah.
or whatever? And you could go reference those and it's really helped us.
Yeah. The other thing that, so those were the ARB maps, and they did not cover the city proper. Mm-hmm. What was in the city proper were, we used to call them DOT plats, but they were plats that were drawn by the city engineer's office back, I think, probably during the Depression. And they were half-quarter sections, oriented east-west. So they were on sheets that were like 18 by 24 landscape, and they'd have an entire half-quarter section on it. In the city proper, so if there was a meets and bounds parcel, it didn't have the deed book and page, but it had every subdivision was reflected on there with dimensions and deed book and page, and it had vacations and openings and stuff. So if you're in the city proper, you could get the city engineer's plats, and find, it's this subdivision here, which is a replat of this one, which was otherwise quite a challenge. Am I going to do something at 10th and Sherman? Well, how do I figure out what's the history there? Okay, I can look at a deed and find out that it's some subdivision, but how do I know it wasn't a replat of a replat of a replat? And so those were invaluable too. And I think the county surveyor's office had a full set of those.
Yeah. At what year was when you started not to go back to the county too far, but was AutoCAD out then?
No.
Everything's pencil and straight edge.
No, AutoCAD, I think when I was at Schneider, we got into AutoCAD around 1986.
Okay.
We had a software. Schneider, I'm sure most people don't know, Schneider was an HP dealer also. We were surveying engineering and an HP dealership.
Okay.
And we had a software called Holguin, Holguin, as I recall. His name Hector Holguin. He was from El Paso. And the software ran on HPs and Wangs. That's all it ran on.
Never heard of Wang.
Yeah, Wang. It was a bigger computer, and it was kind of a drafting. So it was not CAD.
Right.
Right. It was
Kogo program.
It was Kogo program, and you could program it to draw. Right. And we didn't draw plats. Typically, we didn't draw plats with it, but you could draw stuff. I think we got into, I do remember they sent me to an 84, 85, I think I went. Holguin had a I wouldn't call it a user conference, but that's what it was in El Paso. I went to that twice, and I remember they were introducing, the last time I was there, something they were calling Mountaintop. And it was CAD. It was the first CAD stuff I'd ever seen. And I remember going back to the office because I saw this, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I can see the future here.
Yeah.
And I went back to the office, and I said, you all need to understand that in the future, we're going to be resolving boundaries and drawing stuff in a computer. And
Other naysayers
and
who are like, you're crazy.
Yeah, everybody's like, yeah, you're crazy. What are you talking about, right? So I think at Schneider, I know we had moved down to 3020 North Post by then when we started AutoCAD, and that was probably 86, maybe 87 era, 88, somewhere right in there.
So you start at Schneider, what, a month and almost 2 months after you put in your notice with no job, although Jake Hall was nice enough to give you some temporary work. What's your position when you start there?
I was just, we had 2 people in the survey department inside and 3 crews. And nobody had a license. John had a license and Brad had a license, but they were owners and managers, and they needed somebody with a license. So I basically was, just staff surveyor, and signing everything. At that time, I was doing all the research. We were doing work all over the state. I was doing 100% of the research, and the other 2 guys would do the drafting. And between the 3 of us, we'd do the boundary resolution in Holguin, which was a Unix. It was a Unix machine, is what it was, and we had some learning to do. I remember that part because that machine, if you're in the middle of a keystroke, you could pull the plug out of the wall, and when you plugged it back in, it was all still there.
Oh,
wow.
Well, if you remember early AutoCAD,
yeah.
You pulled the plug out of the wall, you just lost 4 hours worth
Right.
of work if you hadn't saved it. So we had some learning there, but yeah, we resolved the boundary, and then I would review it, sign it, and get it out the door. That's how I started.
But
So
if you were doing research, you were all over the state.
I was.
Then.
I was probably in 2/3 of the courthouses in the state of Indiana.
What kind of work was this?
We were doing. We did a lot of Hardys. We did Hardys all over the state.
Okay.
When they came in and took over Burger Chef, we did a boatload of those. A lot of boundary stuff and of course development work. Schneider, was well known for that. We did quite a lot for the Corps of Engineers, and even before I was there, probably in the late 70s and all through the 80s and into the early 90s, we did a lot of work for Corps of Engineers. We ended up doing work for the city, for Larry Coffey and economic development. We did all this stuff along the canal. We did all the work for Circle Center Mall. We did Pan Am Plaza. We did, we were involved in a lot, all the stuff up there at 116th Meridian Technology Center and all that. That was all ours. We did all the work for RV Welch, which became Browning Investments.
So you said 1983 is when you went to Schneider. What kind of equipment at that time? Just trying to paint the picture.
Yeah, we had a 3805, EDHP 3805. It was the yellow one. Brad had his own company. He brought over a 3808, which was the long, that was 3
So these are like scope-mounted EDMs, or these are full HP instruments?
These are those big HPs that were the size of a small suitcase.
Yeah. And they would turn angles and distances, or just shoot distances?
No, just shoot distances.
So what was your angle instrument?
We had T2s and T16s.
Okay, so you turn angles with the T2, pop it out, pop the HP in, shoot distances.
Yep. Exactly.
What kind of prism cluster are we talking about? How many prisms on this thing?
On the 3808, which I think would measure up to 3 miles, so you would use a triple, I think. On the 3805, you probably could get away with one. Maybe you'd have a triple, but I think one usually would do the triple.
Yeah. Selby, not to get on you here, but have you ever used the triple prism cluster?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, back when I first started, I was working for the city engineer in Washington, and we'd shoot full miles and stuff out there in the countryside of Davies County. And yeah, we'd use triple prisms out there.
I've been in that courthouse. I think it burned down at one time.
So you start out, it's 3 crews and 3 guys in the office. When did Schneider kind of explode?
We moved to 3020 North. We were 3675 North Post and moved up there, moved to 3020 in 86.
Was that like the white building exterior with like the green accents?
Yeah, the green wasn't there. Yeah,
Okay.
well, there was some green around, but then it became a church or something. But yeah, we very shortly, within a couple of years, added on to that building. We were expanding pretty quickly before we moved up there, and that's why we had to move. We were adding crews. It's when we hired John Alexander. I don't think any of you guys know John, but so we had, and so I think things started really taking off in the late 80s probably.
And how many crews, when you moved over to that office, how many crews were you up to at that time?
We probably had 5 or 6 when we moved to 3020. And then when we moved up to Fort Harrison, by the time the recession hit in whenever that was, 2008 or whatever, we were running company-wide something like 27 crews, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But, about half of that was working in subdivisions. And, of course, everybody knows that work all just evaporated.
Right. So when you started with Schneider, did they have the iconic Econoline vans at that time? What were they driving?
They were not Econoline. They were driving I think they were Chevy vans is what they had. Yeah. And then our next series did go to the, I don't know if they were called Econoline, but probably in the later 80s we were getting the Ford vans.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't remember. We stuck with Ford. I think maybe we went back to Chevys at one point, and of course now everybody's got 4-wheel drive pickups and stuff.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't uncommon at the time for surveyors to be working out of a station wagon in those days.
Yeah.
I mean,
Schneider had a station wagon. I think that was before I was there, but yeah. That was not unusual at all.
Right.
We had a international harvester Scout.
Holy cow!
We worked out of it one time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, what year would GPS start impacting business?
We did a huge corner perpetuation control project for the airport when Ross Holloway was the head surveyor down there, and this would have been. Oh, gosh, we started that. That was during the transition. It was probably 85, 86. And,
or were you the young whippersnapper that brought this in as a good idea,
no,
like Cad?
We talked about it, and of course it was too expensive. Nobody had it.
Right.
We hired. I'd have to think. George.
GPS George.
GPS George out of Texas. I can't remember the name of the company, and they came up and did the GPS for us. And of course, back then, you'll remember, Ryan won't remember, or you'll know, but when could you use GPS? Well, one was the window.
Mm-hmm.
It's from 1 till 4 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was the way it was back then. And of course, that window moved throughout time, but you had to do your research and figure out when you could use GPS. We also ran second-order levels, 25 miles, second-order level loop that closed, as I recall, Rick Ray, we used an in-bar rod. That was a funny story. We had an in-bar rod, and we had ran second-order levels because we were going to blue book them, Ross, so we want to have them blue booked through NGS. And I think it closed 7.5 hundredths, 25 miles. Rick Rayback did that work, and anybody who knew Rick didn't do anything halfway. Anything Rick touched was pretty much perfect. And what happened was we had to we had to get the rods calibrated.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, no, you can do it afterwards. That's fine, you know. And so I had to arrange, and they were going to be shipped. They were going to be shipped to like England or somewhere because the people in the United States, their equipment was down or broke or something, and we're going to have to send this rod to England. And it took forever, right? They weren't ready. They couldn't do this, couldn't do that. And in the meantime, the airport. So I said, Ross, you know, well, 7.5 hundredths on 25 miles, right? So we just balanced it out in a logical way. And in the meantime, they're designing and building stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So by the time it finally came around, they're like, okay, we can calibrate your rods. It's like, well, it's too late, right? Because everything's underway. And so they never did get calibrated.
So that was for a big build project?
That was back before anybody had anybody in the general public had any concept of the new terminal and the 2 parallel runways and stuff. This was all planning for that. Ross, we set 10 by 10 by 6 foot concrete monuments flush with the ground at every single section and quarter section corner on the airport property. Wow. We observed every one of those, and we ran second order levels through every one of them. And as I recall, they had a clause in their contract said if you touch one of these monuments, that's $5,000 fine. That was a clause in their contractor's contract. Was if they bumped a monument or something, it's $5,000.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, that was all before any of that was, you know, kind of publicly known.
So you knew in what year was this again?
This was 85, 86.
You knew that someday there'd be a new terminal.
Ross said that. He said we're planning for a midfield terminal. There's going to be another runway, actually 2 new runways because they tore out what used to be the main runway. And so, yeah, it was all planning for that, you know, basically, 15 years ahead of time.
And that terminal was built in probably 2009, 2010.
It opened, did it open in 2003, 2004?
It's been open for probably, 15
or
years, a dozen or 15 years?
I remember maybe it was 2007, 2008, because I remember when I deployed. On one of my deployments, I left out of the old terminal and I came home in the new terminal.
I know that we were still in the old terminal in 2005.
Okay, so it probably would have been my 2008 deployment would have been when it opened. Yeah.
So I've done some work out there, and you know that time frame rings a bell.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I-69. You know, I-69 has been a concept of expansion forever. You know, even before we started doing actual work. And I always like to tell people that don't know that they think these projects just pop out of nowhere. And I always tell them, like, you know, I did the control for sections 5 and 6 expansion of I-69. I finished the report when I was in the hospital with my wife with our second child, and he's 15 years old now. Hell, he may be 16. I think he is 16.
Yeah.
But yeah, things. I mean, you know, we're often so far on the front end of things. And things fall apart too. You know, so many things you've surveyed.
69 took forever.
Yeah.
I was involved with government affairs back decades ago, and I remember going to Senate hearings and people trying to foist the idea of expanding I-69, and it would never get through. They're like, the cost, you know, the cost benefit ratio made no sense. And I think, you know, I don't know, it's just me, but I think I have read this, but you don't hear anybody talk about it, that eventually it was really an economic development project. It was not a transportation project. What's it say, 12 minutes or something? Yeah. But all you had to do is drive down through some of those towns down there, and I'm like, you know what, something's got to happen down here. And it was a long time before they finally decided they needed to do something. So I remember being in on those hearings and having votes and like, no, the cost benefit's not there. We're not going to vote for this.
So you're at Schneider. When does advocacy for the profession start? When do you start getting involved with CIC, ISPLS, ALTA standards? When does that? What motivates you? What drives you? When did you get involved?
So I started going to CIC meetings very early on, and it may have been because of the section corner thing when I said we went there. But I also remember Joe Prout telling me I needed to go talk to this guy named Wes Day, who was at Union Title at the time, and Joe was a forward thinker. He was thinking GIS and everything. I went and talked to Wes, and anybody who knew Wes would understand. I walked out of his office thinking, who in the hell is this guy? And we got to be great friends over the years. He was way older than me, but I got involved in CIC. I was actually on the board of CIC probably shortly after I got my license. I might have still been on the county at the time. And ISPLS, I got involved with, when I was still SIT, I was involved with ISPLS. I got an award one year as outstanding SIT or something because I had done several things for the society. So I got involved, and that was really John McIntyre. McIntyre was a president of ISPLS at one time. Was a very big advocate. He said, you have to be involved in your profession. And I think it was it Theodore Roosevelt who said something about being involved with your profession. And so that was a pretty easy sale. I think I've been a member of ISPLS since 1975.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at the county, McIntyre was a big proponent of ACSM, right? And he was the head of what was called the Land Surveys Division of ACSM, LSD. And so I started going to ACSM probably in 77. I've been to every spring conference that ACSM has had since 1977, which of course turned into NSPS. And I got more deeply involved when the fall '85 National Convention, ACSM was going to have a convention in Indianapolis in the fall of '85. And it turned out some things changed, and they needed a director. They needed somebody to run that convention. And I had just done the ISPLS convention in '83. And so I'm like, okay, I talked to John and Brad, because it's going to take some time, and they said, yeah, go for it. So I did, and that's when I got really involved. But my involvement in ISPLS sustained itself because of John Schneider. Right? He was a president in 77 or something. I was still at the county, 77, 78. And he was very involved. He hired Diane Bennett back when she got hired decades ago. And so it was an easy sell. John was an advocate, and so I didn't have to wrestle with management or ownership about being involved. I did pay my own way for a long time just because I felt like that was what I should do. But eventually that changed.
Mm-hmm.
ALTA, and of course when ACSM, I was on their board for 6 years, probably in the mid-'80s, late '80s, maybe early '90s, and then I went back through as president-elect and president in 2000, right around then. I was an officer in NSPS a few years after that or before that, maybe in the 98, 99 realm. ALTA, I got involved in that in 1988. They were proposing the '88 revision, which is when Table A came in. It wasn't even called Table A at the time, but I had some concerns over that, and it was a conference in Virginia Beach, so I went to their meeting. They had a committee meeting, so I went. And I said, I got some concerns over this. And the chair was Mary Fyant, who was a surveyor and a title company owner in Charlevoix, Michigan. But Bob Foster from Massachusetts was very involved. And they listened and they heard what I had to say. So we sat down, we went in the side room, wrote up some stuff. And if you remember that little introductory couple sentences to Table A that says, it needs to be negotiated and blah, blah. That's what came out of that. And so I just stayed involved and found it interesting. We were doing land title surveys at Schneider, and then in '95, Mary Fyant retired off the committee, and she was in her 80s. And Maurer, the executive director, executive vice president of ALTA, called me, Jim Maurer, and said, "Hey, would you like to chair of the committee? Mary's retired. You've been involved." And I said, "Sure, what do I have to do?" And he said, "Well, you got to join ALTA." So I did, and I chaired that committee until last year, which was my choice. I tell people Mary retired off the committee when she was about 82, and I said, I'm not doing that.
So when this meeting in Virginia Beach happened, I mean, you were already engaged in speaking at conferences, or just happened to be there? Or?
Yeah, there's an interesting question. So the first speaking I did, I was, Wes Day was very involved. The three people who wrote what is now Rule 12, it started off as Rule 13 because we had a joint board. And then when the board split, then the engineers kept H64, and we became H65. And there was a rule in there that the engineers had that we didn't need. So Rule 13 of H64 became Rule 12 of H65. I was a big believer in that, and I helped Wes. Wes constantly talked to me about the work on that. It was Jim Dankert and Wes Day and Carl Anderson up in Lebanon. Jim was an owner at Kripe. They wrote the standards, and I was a big proponent of that. And so when those standards got approved, it was just a society standard in 1986 at the ISPLS conference in Vincennes. Got approved, I think, unanimously in a vote at the annual meeting.
So basically, this is voluntary.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, although I don't think theirs is voluntary anymore, but their standards are still maintained and regulated by the society.
I think they are voluntary, but the state uses their standards as a measuring stick. They can't do it officially,
right?
But they do. So what happened was then we adopted Rule 12, or not Rule 12. We adopted those standards.
What were those standards called at the time?
They were just Indiana Survey Standards.
Okay.
Right?
Any pushback? I mean, people are like, "You're crazy. What are you talking about? How much is this going to cost?"
There was. Recording surveys, it's going to be a disaster, all kinds of stuff. So I put together a program with Wes, who was an author, and George Summers, who was an attorney friend of mine from Baker & Daniels at the time. And the three of us went out on the road, and we did about 5 or 6 programs around the state to help surveyors learn about these voluntary standards. And that was my first speaking. And then in 1988, they were adopted by the board, and they became Rule 13, and then in 92, they became Rule 12. So that's my first speaking was probably in 1987. I actually have a spreadsheet of every program I ever gave.
Is that right?
Oh, wow.
How many credit hours do you think you've taught throughout the years?
Oh gosh, I don't. I got caught in an audit. It's probably been 10, 12 years ago. Not caught. They said you're going to be audited. Send in what your credits are. And I thought, this was when I was teaching. It's been longer ago than that. It's been 20 years ago because I was teaching IUPUI, right? And I was teaching 2 classes, 3 hours each, every semester. So I I'm like, okay, I'll take that challenge. Let me see how many credits I have for the last 2 years. And it was like 430.
Oh, wow.
Because number one, I was teaching, which you get double.
Yeah.
And it was a 3-hour course, and a semester hour was worth 15 points, 15 credits, and it's a 3-hour course. That's 45 times 2 is 90, and I taught 4 of them during that period. So I had 360 credits just from teaching.
And you were teaching at IUPUI?
IUPUI, yeah.
And what year did that start?
I was teaching there from 99 to 2006.
Okay.
In my spare time, I often think back, and I actually can't get my head around how I had the time to do that.
Right.
Because I was teaching 2 classes, and Joe Hess was one of my students. Rod Kelly was one of my students.
Yeah.
There was a whole bunch of people out there who were
Half
students.
the guys in here have talked about taking classes at IUPUI. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So it was a lot of. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I think today I'm like, I have no idea how I had the time to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because your kids would have then been what, high school age at that point?
Yeah, my
there?
let's see, my daughter and became ex-wife. They moved to California in 2001. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have that. My son was around, but he was out of high school and working. So yeah. It was, but it was fun. I absolutely loved the teaching. It was a lot of fun.
So you're on a road trip talking to surveyors about why they need to do more work and make less money, which I'm sure you're getting pushback. When does those speaking engagements start going beyond the footprint of Indiana?
What happened was Judd Rauch, who was president of ISPLS back at some point, he ended up teaching at UA Little Rock. And right around that same, 2 things happened. So Milton Denny was a friend of mine, and Milton called me. This would have been, I don't know, late 80s. He called me and he said, hey, I've got a program to do for the Tennessee Convention. And as you know, I had a heart attack a while back, and he said, my doctor told me I can't do that. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, can you do it? And I said, well, what is it? He said, it's the business of surveying. And I said, sure, I'll do that. Now, this is before, email was pervasive and all this stuff. And I said, you got any, when's the conference? He called me like on Monday. He goes, it's Friday. And I'm like, well, do you have materials? He goes, yeah, I got a book. He had a little book.
Right, I had that book.
Right, yeah. I said, I'll send it to you. I had to send it, all right? Send it to me. Mm-hmm. I get it.
A couple days after Monday, so you get it like Wednesday maybe.
No, I get it like Thursday, right? And I'm driving down there Thursday night. And I get down, and I worked all day, right? So I get down to Nashville. It's like 10 p.m. Well, I guess I better look at this material that I'm going to talk about tomorrow. And by that time, I was pretty. I wasn't running surveying, but I was very involved in all of that. And I read that, and I'm like, this is what I do every day.
Right.
I can do this.
Did he have a PowerPoint for you? Just
no,
Gary up there talking.
No, it was just me up there talking, and it went well. And then as I got involved in ALTA, so Judd knew I was involved in ALTA. So around that same time, he had me go out to Little Rock to speak on the standards. And that went well. And then what happens is the executive directors all talk to each other, right? And so, you guys are your executive director of Missouri and you're executive director of New Mexico, and you're like, who'd you have at your conference last year? Oh, I had Ryan Selby. How'd it go? Oh, it went pretty well. And you get a phone call. Yeah. Hey, would you like to come to New Mexico? And so I start off, and it was all ALTA. Well, what happens in very short order is, hey, you got, everybody loved your program. What else do you do, right? And so then you start expanding and into other things, which was stuff that I was doing anyway, and it was interesting. So that's how that all happen. I have a friend, I won't say who it is, he's one of the national speakers, and he approached me probably 15, 20 years ago, and he said, I think I have things I can contribute, and I'm curious, how did you get into this? And I said, I would suggest submitting something to POB or American Surveyor or Professional Surveyor. Just write up something that's pretty good and submit it. I said, somebody's going to read it and say, well, that's pretty good. Let me have him come to my conference and speak. Mm-hmm. And so he did. He started writing for one of the magazines, and now I know he's in Washington this spring. He's nationally known. And that was
What state's he from?
he's going to get the name out of it before the day's out.
I'm not going to. I guess I could tell you that. It's Chris Klein is who it was. Way back when, and he's done really well. He's written some books, and he's speaking nationally. And unfortunately, of course, I'm always speaking at the same time, so I never get to hear him speak. But by all accounts, I guess he does a pretty good job, and we correspond off and on. And I'm good friends. It's been a lot of fun. I'm good friends with Don Wilson of Wilson Robillard, those books, and in fact, he has a new book out on the original survey, and I reviewed the book for him, the chapters as he was writing them. So he has some very nice thing to say about me in the foreword of that book. I know Walt well. I haven't seen him in a couple of years, but I heard he just did a program recently, which kind of stunned me because I think he's 91 or 90, I think.
Wow.
So it's been a lot of fun. Met a lot of fun, good people. Mike Palomari, who's speaking this year, he invited me to his house a few years ago because he knew I was down in San Diego, so he invited a bunch of surveyor friends, and we all went to his house and sat around in an evening and probably had a Diet Coke.
What is it about surveying that gets in people's blood? And obviously it's gotten in your blood. I think it's gotten in Ryan and myself's blood. I mean, what do you think the characteristic traits and what is it that drive people? What is it that drives you?
Yeah, I can start answering that question by saying something that I tell people, because everybody thinks they're unique. Farming is unique, or whatever, and surveyors want to feel that way. But there is something that I think is unique, and that is that I don't know that I've ever known a true surveyor, somebody's licensed and practicing surveying, who wishes they did something else.
Right.
I've never heard a surveyor say, I hate this. I wish I'd become a doctor or this or that. And I think that's unique because I know attorneys who hate being attorneys. I know doctors who don't like being doctors, but you never come across a surveyor who says, God, I wish I'd done something different with my life.
Right.
And that's kind of unique. And I don't know how you capture that and use that to – but I tell parents or people I interact with, I said, I'll tell you one thing. If somebody gets into surveying, they're probably going to love it, no matter what you do. Look at Dave Doyle. Dave isn't even licensed, but he loves everything. So what is that characteristic? And I haven't thought long and hard about that, but I don't know. I don't know what that is.
It's a funny profession, and you get people that come into it that think this is temporary. I'm just doing this until I find what I really want to do. Mm-hmm. And 20 years later, they're still doing it. I can remember little Ryan Perry, who's now the survey manager at RQAW, coming in. He was a math whiz, I think, and Perry Cloyd had hired him, and they brought him to the convention, and he was real cocky, and I'm like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm just doing this until I figure out what I'm really going to do with math. And 20-some years later, he's he's the man. He's the man over there running the show. So
Yeah,
I mean, it just gets in your blood somehow.
Yeah, and I don't know what that is, and it's not. There are so many aspects of it. There are people who I know people who love construction layout. That's all they want to do. Don't put me in the office. I want to do construction layout. It's in their blood, And there's people who love. I happen to love the legal aspects,
Right.
Which borders into standards, but boundaries and easements and rights of way, and I've gotten into railroads and all that stuff. I just love that. I don't know what it is about us that that is that thing. Is it the people? Because surveyors are not people persons generally.
Right.
I mean, you're a different one, but most of us are not. I'm not. And is there some element related to that? And I'm just not. I'm not really sure what that is. I wish I could figure out what it was because that might help us in recruiting people.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's why I always think it's interesting. Like, what subject in school were you really interested in? And they're almost always centered around math, science. I mean, for me, it was drafting. I really love drafting. But yeah, I mean, I love it. I mean, at the older I get, I'm maybe not quite as driven as I once was. I'm not as quite as much a sponge as I once was. But just like you said, I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
No, I mean, I've loved every minute. I changed majors and never looked back. Well, I did, actually, when I was at the county at one time. This would have been late 70s. I thought I might want to become a doctor. So I actually took, I knew I would have to take organic chemistry. So I actually went over to IUPUI and took an organic chemistry class. And my goal was to see if I could still get a good grade without working very hard at it. And I did. But, my wife was a nurse, and I knew what it was going to take. It was going to take another 3 years of school and then residency, everything. And I'm like, yeah, it didn't do it. But through all of that, I loved what I was doing. It was just something that I had in the back of my mind, but I never regretted it. Never looked back. It's been a great run for me.
Right. Any projects stand out in your mind that are like, you're proud you're involved with?
Yeah, we did quite a bit of retracement on Lake Monroe for the Corps of Engineers, and that was very rewarding. We actually did a lot of that. Working for the Corps, some great people down there. We had a great team. We were down there for, a couple of years probably working on some of this. That was really, really fun work. We did the topo. Rick did the topo for the GM truck plant up in Fort Wayne. I got a call. I got a call from what ended up being GM, and they wanted us to come to Detroit to meet with them because they had 1,000 acres, and they wanted topo done. Now, this was in 1984, 85. They wanted topo done on the ground in 30 days.
Wow.
And so I flew up to Detroit and listened to them, and they said, we don't want it flown. I think they must have had a bad experience with photogrammetry.
Right.
So we don't want it flown, not flying it. Need a number. Right? And so we thought, well, we're gonna partner. There was another company who was interested, and we thought, well, we will quote half of it because I didn't see how we could get all of it done. And we gave them a quote, and they came back and said, we need your quote to be the whole thing. So we had given them a number, and we like tripled it or a double and a half at least double and a half, maybe tripled to do the whole thing. And I can still remember they called me and said, we're going to have a conference call with you guys. And so I called John and Brad, and we went up to the conference room, and they said they were awarding that contract to us, 1,000-acre total. This is in August, right? So it's all corn. 1,000-acre total on the ground, 100-foot grid in 30 days. And it was very obvious that there was not going to be any discussion about, well, what if we don't get done? What if it rains or whatever? That never came up because it was patently obvious that was not part of the discussion. And they awarded it to us for a boatload of money. And we hung up the phone, and John and Brad looked at me, and John says, so how are you going to get this done? And I looked at him, and I said, I have no idea.
How many crews at this time? Like handful?
Oh, yeah, we probably had 4 crews.
Oh, my.
So we sent Rick up there, and he hired some people. We hired a crew from Allen Stanley down in Greencastle. We found some people up in Fort Wayne. And it was one of those projects. It got all done. It was all Mylar. I rolled it all up. I got on an airplane, and I flew to Detroit, and I said, here's your survey. and yeah, so that was a big one. We did a lot of work, some really, really good work for a large international firm based in Indianapolis. I can't tell you who it is, or I'd have to kill you. But we've done a lot of work for them, including some really, really big stuff.
Right.
And that was cool stuff. I'm sure there's some other. But those are all the stuff at Circle Center Mall.
Yeah.
Pan Am Plaza. I was involved in that before, when it was still like parking lots and stuff. In fact, I just had a call on that on the way up here.
Really?
That was in 1985 probably, and of course they're going to build a hotel there and stuff. Now a couple of hotels, I think. Yeah, it's been a bunch of neat stuff. Yeah.
Who are the unsung heroes along the way? I mean, I think as a licensed surveyor, you're obviously in the forefront, but I mean, who are the people through the years that will support staff that you just never will forget?
Yeah, the head of surveying at the time when I started, Steve Cooper, who just died a year ago. His son, Chris was his dad. Steve was kind of a mentor of mine. John Schneider, unquestionably. In fact, when I had the offer from them, I thought, well, I'm gonna call some people, right? I know a bunch of people. I know people who worked at Schneider. I'm gonna call them. Just ask them And all 3 of them, 2 of them had left under less than desirable circumstances. I won't name names, and they're gone now anyway. But one of them, Schneider wanted to replace him, so they ran a blind ad, and he applied for it. So, but I called 3 of them, and all 3 of them said exactly the same thing to me. They said, I have the utmost respect for John Schneider. And I said, oh, that's good enough for me. Right? So John had a big impact on with me in more than one way. The field people we had, Rick Rayback, I spent 30 years, looking at Rick's stuff and never found one thing, not one thing that, like, hey, Rick, you need to redo this. Never happened. Mike Mulrine, who's a friend of mine, he was another party chief. He's down in West Virginia, and I just saw him last week. He was another great guy. Both of them got licensed eventually. Dick Levering, who was our third-party chief when I started, he was construction layout guy, best construction layout guy I ever saw. Really, really good. So you can't do it without the field help.
Yeah,
that is absolutely for sure. But Joe Prout had he had some problems, but he had an impact on me in that first year or two before he resigned the office. McIntyre, unquestionably, that's probably why I got so involved in the societies, so I give him credit. But Warren Marks, a reason I got into surveying was because of Warren Marks and teaching me CE 200. And he ended up not getting tenure at Purdue. He went to Penn State, Wilkes-Barre, and died early. He had a heart attack probably when he was in his 30s, and then he died of a heart attack probably when he was in his 50s. And I did get to see him at the Pennsylvania conference one time, and I said, "You are the reason I'm in surveying."
Mm-hmm.
So I was happy I got to tell him that. So yeah, there's been a bunch of people who have been impactful.
Right. So you worked at Schneider for how many? You're still working in some capacity there, but what time did you kind of stop becoming a full-time employee and start your own thing? And
I was gonna retire at the end of 2019. And
like officially, like I'm done. I'm not doing anything.
Right.
Not even speaking.
No, I was going to continue doing that.
Okay.
Right. So I do some consulting, I do expert witness work, and I do the speaking. And that was my niche at the company. So I knew that I could take all that with me without non-compete wasn't going to be an issue. So I told him that I was going to retire at the end of the year, and that ended up, it didn't happen at the end of the year. It was going to be end of January, and but I tell the story. It's like they wouldn't let me. No, no, you can't retire. And Tom Mann asked if I would stay on part time to, consulting,
do any
answer
mentoring
questions,
still?
do some mentoring, do some training, and so I've been doing that the last 3 years, almost 3 years now. And I've had a couple other things I've had to do with them, and I was involved in safety, and we had some projects a couple projects that I managed for them. But so that's been almost 3 years now, which is kind of shocking to me. But COVID kind of spun us all for a loop. It seems like it was a year ago. So So I started my little LLC. Which is basically, it's from a tax standpoint, it's me. It doesn't matter. Meridian Land Consulting, and I do a reasonable amount of stuff. I'm involved right now in probably half a dozen things that are either headed to court or will go to court or might go to court. Most of them settle ahead of time. I do some consulting. Usually, the segue is that we have a lawsuit, or we're going to have a lawsuit. I do get involved in a little bit of surveying. I try not to because I don't have I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if I have field work, I sub it to Schneider. We have a contract, and I sub it to them, which I just did last week. I got involved in something that somebody's got a call from an attorney I do a lot of work for. So, and still doing the speaking. I'm busier than what I would like to be.
Right.
But it's hard because you love it,
Yeah. So what does the future hold? I mean, where do you go from here? And
I need to start winding things down a little bit. I don't mean wind down like I'm going to quit doing stuff, but I don't want to be as busy as I am.
Right.
So I need to figure out how to do that, but it's kind of hard. In fact, the last project I got, I sent the attorney a note back, and I said, "So I'll look at this, and and then he called me back, left me a message, and he said, "Sounds like you're interested. I'll send all the stuff to you." So. I mean, it's hard. Number one, I love it, and number two, you've got people who are relying on you. There's some specialized things that I do, and so it's hard to say, "Yeah, no, you're on your own. I'm not gonna be involved." The speaking, I love the speaking. An awful lot of it went virtual for a couple of years. A lot of it's coming back now, but I want to start reeling some of that in a little bit, and I mean, it's all in my control. But when you love it, it's kind of hard to.
What do you like to do outside of surveying?
Every fall I go hiking with a friend of mine who is a surveyor that I knew at Schneider, and now he's off somewhere else. But we go hiking or canoeing. We've been up in the Boundary Waters a number of times, and we've been hiking out west. This last year we went out by Black Canyon of the Gunnison and Mesa Verde. I do that every year. I love that kind of thing, hiking and camping. We've done a lot of that.
I'm sure you're always looking for monuments and stuff while you're doing that.
So 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, we were in Canyonlands, and we were looking at a quad sheet. We're in the ranger station in quad sheet, and I'm like, oh man, there's a triangulation station up there, and we're standing there, and there's a ranger right there. He's like, yeah, I don't think you can get to that one. Well,
challenge accepted.
I'm like, okay, right. So, we went down there, and it's got to be up there. It's going to be the high point up there. And I did. My older brother, went with me up there. He didn't want me to go by myself, apparently, and it was kind of a crazy climb up there. In fact, it was crazy. There was some stupid stuff to get up on top. But, we look around and it's like, yeah, bingo, there it is right there.
Yeah.
So always by Canyon of Gunnison, we're out looking around for stuff. And Mesa Verde, we found some stuff. And you can't not do that.
Yeah, right. My wife always accuses me of lining stuff up with my eye. We'll be sitting on the porch or whatever talking, and I'm over there like. And then the same thing, you're walking on vacation. Like, there's a monument. There's a PK nail. There's a mag nail right there. So it's in you. You can't get rid of it.
No, you can't. Yeah, all you gotta do is look at Facebook or LinkedIn or something, and everybody's like, "Look what I found today."
Yep. I had a couple of those on my vacation earlier this year. So.
Yeah, you posted those up, right?
Yep.
I saw those. Yeah, yeah. It's fun, and I go out with Lynn and. He's in surveying, so it's easy for us. It's like we're all of a sudden one of us is wandering off. It's like, yeah, I know what he's doing.
What would you say to the young surveyors today and just starting their career out? What advice would you give?
I would say be involved. Find something that you like. Whether you guys remember. Doug Herendine, he loved being involved with conferences. He ran our conference for 25 years probably. Whether it's that as government affairs or whatever it is, get involved professionally. It's so rewarding to meet people. I've loved being involved at ACSM and now NSPS. There's so many people you meet from across the country and opportunities. So I would say one thing, go and get involved. I would probably say almost more at a national level, not to discount ISPLS, but it's like, well, I already know everybody. All right, well, then you don't know people from New Mexico. I mean, I know surveyors literally in every single state that I could call them up and go have dinner with them in every single state. And you learn a lot of stuff. You meet a lot of interesting people. Dave Doyle is one of my best friends. I met Dave in 1985. So I would say be involved and find something that you really like. I like boundaries. I like easements. I would also encourage people to probably do something like join Toastmasters because we need people out speaking. Mm-hmm. You look around, it's like, okay, well, who's the 40-year-old who's like the new national speaker? I don't know. You tell me, because there isn't one. So find something that you like, get involved, get some confidence in public speaking. Toastmasters is a great way to do that. And then maybe write something, get out there and start doing presentations.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can remember the reason I remember the Schneider building, the white with the green accents. I mean, I think that was the first CIC meeting I ever went to was at Schneider, and that would have been like I had moved to Indianapolis a month, in 1999, and instantaneously had gotten involved.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we see that as much today? I mean, Ryan, what do you?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's funny you say that, because I was just talking to Ed Sweetland about this the other day. I'm pretty sure the first CIC meeting I went to was at Schneider's building in the fort. A handful of years ago. But yeah, I mean, definitely I agree with that.
Yeah.
Just start getting involved, and it's amazing how many people you meet.
Yeah, and I mean, it can help you, and if you end up wanting to switch jobs or finding somebody that you can talk to who has expertise in something, or, I mean, I got to know Don Wilson, right? Don's, written books with Walt Rollard and stuff, and Don and I are pretty good friends. And actually, Chris Klein knows Don quite well also. So, you meet some really interesting people, and you can learn a lot and listen. Listen and learn, I guess.
what's it like when you guys all get together? Is it, some heated conversations or?
No, I Jeff Lucas is a good friend of mine, and Jeff and I have had some interesting conversations. They're not heated by any means. Everybody kind of respects each other,
Right.
And but you learn stuff, and I think it's always. I have a friend. Actually, the call on my phone. I have a friend. He's not a surveyor. He's an insurance guy. But he and I don't see the same way politically, and I decided at some point, I said, I need to understand where he's coming from. So I know he's calling me. He's like, when are we getting together? Because we get together and then we talk about stuff.
Right.
And I learn stuff from him. He learns stuff from me. We haven't changed each other's minds, but you learn. And it's so important to listen.
Yeah, that seems to be lost today.
Yeah, it is.
And you brought up, and this is kind of just complete side note, but you brought up Dave Doyle, and his wife is also an NGS geodesist.
Yep.
I can't imagine the conversations they have around the dinner table. I mean, that would be. I'm sure it would be over all of our heads, but it would be interesting to sit back and listen to.
I could tell you some funny stuff, but if you ask Dave Doyle, who's not listening to this, and anybody who is going to you can call up Dave and ask him this. Say, why did Renee marry you? And he is going to say, because she said Gary Kent wasn't available. I knew Renee from long ago. She was actually a geodesist and helped us with the Harn way back when.
Right.
And I love both. We had dinner at their house when I was out in D.C. with my son a few months back, or about a year ago, I guess. So great people.
Yeah, Renee helped get height modernization off the ground here in Indiana as well. She done some speaking engagements, and it's such a great resource that we've had in Indiana. Some forward thinking. The Harn,
even though we were the last,
were the last one, but in a way that was forward thinking that let some others, make the mistakes. We were probably not quite an early adopter of height modernization, but we're probably ahead of the game for most states.
I think so.
I think Indiana has always been somewhat of a forward-thinking state. I mean, we've got some, I don't want to say more stringent rules and regulations, but rules and regulations that make sense. I look at other states and they have what I call rules for tools, and I'm like, how does this happen? How do you guys come up with these requirements that you have? I mean, it's insane. But I can contribute to that to you and people like you that have really put a lot of thought in things. And that's what I said at the beginning of the show, a visionary. And I think you've left an indelible mark on this profession in the state of Indiana and beyond. And we can't thank you enough, Gary. So
I appreciate that. I was remembering, speaking of Dave, I was remembering a story Dave told me when we were out in D.C. And it kind of goes along with this, maybe wrapping this a little bit. And he said he started, he had been in the Army, or I think it was in the Army anyway. He ended up at NGS, and Joe Dracup was an infamous person at NGS back in the day. And he said he said, Joe called me in his office, and he said, so here's your instructions. He said, you will go to the ACSM conferences. And he said, you will find the people that you need to meet, and you will take them, I can't remember how he said it. Basically, he said, you will go to the bar, and he said, you will shut up and listen to them, and you will pick up the tab and no, we're not going to reimburse you. But we need to know, because we design our stuff based on those people's input. So that's what you need to be doing. And so it's kind of like that. That's why I say get involved, because you learn stuff, and you can be a part. I mean, that's how I got just involved in ALTA, right? I mean, everybody's like, "Oh, you're the ALTA guy." Well, I showed up at a meeting in 1988, and look what happened, So I think being involved professionally is a really, really important thing. And you guys, credit to you guys, because you have been, and I would encourage you to, take the opportunity and expand that if you can.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
No, this has been great.
I mean, we've ran substantially longer than.
Yeah, this might end up being a part 1 and part 2. We might have to break this somewhere around the Schneider days or something.
I think that would be fine. I mean, and I think that, not that we had reasons to bring you in. I mean, it was obviously I wanted to hear your story just from my own personal reasons. But I think this will, I think people are going to be very interesting to hear just the start. I mean, I think people know you, but they don't know you at that deep level. And it's been great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me. It's been fun.
Yeah,
I love the interaction. The setup here is a lot of fun. So, I'm not going away.
So we'll bring you back then.
All right, fair enough.
All right, guys. Well, again, we thank you for spending time with us, and look forward to seeing people at the convention. I'm not sure when this one will come out, post-convention or before, but we really look forward to the companionship. Unfortunately, I don't think Gary's going to be at this one because of prior engagements.
New York and Indiana are always at the exact same time. And if I am not in Indiana, it's because I'm in New York. I've been at the convention every year since '75, except for probably 3 or 4 times I was in New York.
Right. So with that, we thank Gary, we thank Ryan for hosting, and we'll catch you again on the next Hoosier Surveyor podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Hoosier Surveyor podcast, brought to you by the Indiana Society of Professional Land Surveyors. For more information about the society, please visit ISPLS.org, or if you are new to the profession, you can find helpful resources at futureindianasurveyor.com.